If you enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe. This is a list I put together to try to get some synergy between the Auric Champions and some of our units. The stratagems, in my opinion, are still quite weak. They're only able to be used on the Custodes character models, making them more a situational bonus. We can make some things work with the detachment rule, since it now works on the whole Custodes character unit. This list does have some Forgeworld, but one of the units is an easy proxy we all have access to. The other is Venatari, which we can change to our bikes if we want to for this list, because it is the lance keyword we're looking for, so you can use the Vertus Praetors instead of the Venatari if you have those instead. Either unit will do. The Venatari are a little bit better, but the bikes still can do what we need to do with them in this list. This list is going to have a surprising amount of anti-tank for a Custodes list, especially a list that has no Caladius Grav-tanks. Now let's go over this Custodes anti-tank list. I used the Auric Champions Detachment. I named it Spear Shot. It is 2,000 points. Our Warlord is a Shield Captain on a Dawneagle jet bike, and he has the Veiled Blade enhancement. For our characters, we have 2 Bladechampions with no enhancements. Our battle line, we have 4 Custodian Guard, 3 with Spears, 1 with a Vexilla and the Shield and Misericordia. For our other datasheets, we have 2 units of the Melta Spear Custodes, and those will be joining the Bladechampions. 2 units of 3 Venatari, each of them have the Venatari Lances. A unit of 4 Prosecutors, 2 Venerable Land Raiders that we will be putting the Bladechampions with the Melta Spears into. And then finally, we have Draxus, who will be joining the Custodian Guard. So this could possibly work because we do get the +1 to wounds, so that will help with the strength gnawing of the Melta Spear shooting into vehicles. Now we'll be wounding most vehicles on 4s. So we'll see what happens. We'll go through this list because I do believe it is an interesting, fun list, and it's something that maybe if you want to, you can sub the Venatari for some bikes and just say your Custodian Guard are the Melta Spears. No one's going to fight you with that. So like I said, this is a fun list, so feel free to sub some things out. We're not looking to break the game with this list, but we're looking to kind of find some things that we can use in Auric Champions. Now we'll go over the army rule and the detachment rule. The army rule is martial kata. Each time a unit from your army with this ability is selected to fight, select one of the kata stances. Until that unit has finished making its attacks, the selected stance is active for it and it gains the relevant ability. Dakatari stance, melee weapons equipped by models in this unit have the sustain hits 1 ability. Rendak stance, melee weapons equipped by models in this unit have the lethal hits ability. A great army rule to boost our melee damage potential. If we'll be wounding on a 4+ or less, you want to pick sustained 1. If it's 5 or 6s, pick the lethal hits. And then for the Auric Champions Detachment rule, we have Assemblage of Might. At the start of your command phase, select 1 unit from your opponent's army. Until the start of your next command phase, each time a model in your Adeptus Custodes character unit from your army makes an attack that targets the enemy unit, add 1 to the wound roll. And this is what we're going to be building the list around, is this detachment building, since the stratagems only really work on character models. Now we'll go over the Auric Champions stratagems. I'll quickly flash up here the 2 stratagems that I'm not really going to be focusing on for this list. If they come up, I will use them in my game, but if not, I'm not really going to be paying attention to these that much. Now let's quickly go over the ones that I will be using. Earning a name in the fight phase for 1 CP, up to 2 Adeptus Custodes character units from your army that have not been selected to fight this phase. Until the end of the phase, each time a character model in either of your units make an attack that targets a monster or vehicle unit, you can reroll the hit roll and you can reroll the wound roll. And this will be quite strong if we can use this on both Bladechampions in the fight phase. Then we have Slayer of Champions for 1 CP in any phase, and this is after one of your Adeptus Custodes units has destroyed the Assemblage of Might target. We can use 1 CP, select another unit, then for the rest of the turn, only your character models get the +1 to wound against that target. Not your character units, just your character models. So this is pretty much Codex release Assemblage of Might, where just your character models get the +1 to wound. Still, it can be handy for getting extra wounds through with those Bladechampions. Then we have Emperor's Auspice for 1 CP, your opponent's shooting or the fight phase just after an enemy unit has selected its targets. 1 Adeptus Custodes unit from your army that was selected as a target of 1 or more of those attacks. Till the end of the phase, that character model in your unit have the 4-up Feel No Pain ability. Then finally we have Vigil on Ending For 2 CP in the fight phase, this is a fight on death for your character. This will be more used on the Shield Captain since we can reduce it to 1 CP, making it a little more worth it, because for 2 CP, for your character to fight on death just isn't worth it. Now let's go over the actual units in the list. Our Warlord is going to be the Shield Captain on Dawneagle Jetbike. This is going to be a great unit for getting on objectives early and doing secondary actions. Even if we take the Vertus Praetors instead of the Venatari, I would still run the Shield Captain as a lone character unit. With the Veiled Blade enhancement, this model will have 9 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 7, AP 2, damage 2, with Lance for +1 to wound if the Shield Captain has charged this turn, along with access to Martial Kata for sustained hits 1 or lethal hits in melee. Veiled Blade can also once per game triple the OC value of the Shield Captain, giving it a nice objective stealing number of 6. The Earning a Name stratagem for reroll the hit roll and wound roll against monster and vehicle units will be helpful. I want to try to save the Shield Captain's strategic mastery for Emperor's Auspice though, to give this unit a 4-up feel no pain as much as possible. Make this an annoying points gaining unit for the entire game. Next up is our 2 units of Bladechampions with the 5 Pyrothite Spear Custodian Guard. These are the units the list is built around, with the idea that the Land Raiders will help get them up the board quick and safe. The Detachment Rule Assemblage of Might will give the Melta Spear shots +1 to wound against that target. The Pyrothite Spear Custodian Guard have 2 abilities. The first is the same as our Codex Custodian Guard, Stand Vigil, where the unit re-rolls wound rolls of 1 and re-roll the wound roll if in range of an objective they control. The second ability is No Foe Shall Stand. Once per battle until the end of the shooting phase, this unit gets lethal hits and ignore cover. The lethal hits is a nice bonus, but it is the ignores cover on an AP4 weapon that adds the extra spice. Unless the target has an Arm of Contempt style ability or a 2+ save, this will cut right through 3+ save targets with D6 damage and Melta 2. We can drive up in a Land Raider, jump out, shoot at a target, and then charge. The Pyrothite Spears have the same melee profile of the Guardian Spear, with 5 attacks, hitting on 2s, strength 7, AP 2, damage 2, combined with the Stand Vigil ability and a Bladechampion leading each unit. This unit will hit very hard mid-range shooting and very hard hitting in melee. The Land Raiders also give us a chance to save the Bladechampions once per game advance and charge ability until later turns. We use the Land Raiders to get these units mid-board, and then clear the mid-board, and then advance and charge these units deep into the heart of the enemy. Since the Auric Champions stratagems only work on the Bladechampions, there are 2 stratagems we can use to help boost the overall melee damage with Slayer of Champions and Earning a Name. Slayer of Champions we can use to put a Codex release Assemblage of Might on a new target where only character models get the +1 to wound against the new target. Earning a Name can give both Bladechampions in the list reroll hits and wounds against monsters and vehicles, giving this list even more anti-vehicle, anti-monster. Then we have Draxus with the 4 Custodian Guard. Draxus attached to the Custodian Guard turns the unit into a Custodian character unit, which does give the unit access to Assemblage of Might for +1 to wound against the target. Her unit would not gain access to the Auric Champions stratagems. The great part is, Draxus and the Custodian Guard combination has never needed stratagems to be amazing. They are a nice bonus, but the +1 to wound from the detachment rule will make her unit even more deadly. The unit will be able to threaten light to heavy infantry now. Her Psychic Tempest has lost the indirect fire ability, but that's not a huge loss to her utility. The pros to taking this unit compared to the cons, unless there's a huge point hike, are very one-sided. I'll throw up a few slides here of why you want to take Draxus in your Custodian Guard list. She just adds so much utility and anti-infantry shooting that we just don't get anywhere else in the Codex or Forgeworld really. Next is our 2 units of 3 Venatari or the 2 units of 2 Vertus Praetors if that is what you've chosen for the list. These 2 units will be used for taking out lone light infantry units, taking the enemy off objectives, and secondary actions. Both the Venatari and the Vertus Praetors have the Lance ability on their weapons, giving them the +1 to wound in melee on the charge, making it so they do not need the detachment rule Assemblage of Might for +1 to wound, since they will most likely get that from charging into an enemy with their Lance. The Venatari are better at this role since they have the 0 CP rapid ingress built into their datasheet ability. Even if we use the bikes instead of the Venatari, like I said, I would still run the Shield Captain on Dawneagle jet bike as a lone character. With the character attached to the Vertus Praetors, it does get a bit expensive for an action monkey or a trade unit, so I'd rather keep these things separate. None of the Auric Champion stratagems would work on either of these units though, not a deal breaker. Next is our humble Prosecutors. This will be our home objective holder. If there will be too much pressure on the home objective, Draxus and her Custodian Guard can help defend the home objective as well. A simple cheap unit for 40 points for a home objective holder to hopefully free up our more dangerous units. Not much else to say since the Auric Champion stratagems and detachment rule assemblage of might will not work on this unit since there are no characters in this unit. Finally, let's talk about our 2 Venerable Land Raiders. These will provide transport to our 2 Bladechampion and Melta Spear units. The Land Raiders will also give a source of long-range anti-tank damage, with the 2 Melta Spear units providing more mid-range anti-tank. No stratagem support except the core stratagem since the Venerable Land Raider is not a character unit. A great unit to help and hold take objectives too, especially once they've dropped off their infantry cargo. It does hit on 2s, which does make it more reliable than a Space Marine Land Raider. Not as potent as a Grav tank, but it does give us 8 las cannon shots hitting on 2s between the 2 Land Raiders. Enough that the enemy has to respect the long range shooting in this list. They can't just deploy on the line and hopes that we're not going to shoot at them. Now for the game plan for this list, and this is just a rough game plan just to give you guys some ideas of what you can do with this list. We want to start our Land Raiders in good positions to get them up the board as fast as possible so you're not moving around a whole bunch of terrain. You want to kind of have them out. They may take some shots, but unless there's some overwhelming enemy range shooting, we want to start these Land Raiders on the deployment line if possible. Our Venatari or Vertus Praetors unit, we can start them in deep strike. We could start the Vertus Praetors on the board for early board control if we like, just because the Venatari do have that built-in rapid ingress, so you would like to put them in deep strike. For Prosecutors, we want to start them near the home objective. We can start them on that home objective if the enemy has no indirect fire. We don't want to give them an early turn 1 overwhelming force secondary if we do put them on the home objective and they have indirect and they just indirect them off the board, start them off the objective, and just move on to them on their turn. This is going to be an aggressive list. We have to get close to shoot our Melta Spears and then charge. The Venatari and the Vertus Praetors plus our Shield Captain on the Dawneagle are great for disrupting enemy scoring and doing secondary actions. We can use the Land Raiders to hold objectives while shooting down the board. Once the Bladechampion and the Melta Spear Custodes have disembarked, we can sit them on objectives, holding them and allowing our other units to push forward. With Assemblage of Might giving the Melta Spears +1 to wound against that Assemblage of Might target, we could shoot a vehicle monster to death and then charge a different enemy unit. The melee will be strong enough that we can use Assemblage of Might on targets we want to shoot instead of charging, so maybe you want to put the +1 to wound on a vehicle, you shoot that to death, and then maybe you charge a lighter infantry unit that we don't need +1 to wound on, with the Bladechampion and the 5 attacks each from these Melta Spears in combat. Now for some final thoughts. This is a list I'm very curious how it does against a vehicle-heavy list. It still has plenty of melee strength too. Testing rolls and mock battles are not quite the same as a real game. I would like to play a few more pure plastic codex lists. I wanted to make something a little different than the Shield Host competitive list. The Land Raiders paired with the Melta Spears +1 to wound against the Assemblage of Might target could end up being very deadly into vehicles and heavy infantry. Hope you all enjoyed this attempt to make a different style of list using the Auric Champions Detachments. Like I said, you can use the Vertus Praetors instead of the Venatari, and then you're just going to say your Custodian Guards with the Bladechampion have Melta Spears. No one's going to get on your back for not having Melta Spears with your Custodian Guard. Say the proxy, good enough. And like I always say, thanks for watching, thanks for stopping by.